Man, that was a killer episode. The last episode of Dank Talk went really well. If you haven't watched it yet, it's now on Instagram. It'll be up on my YouTube soon. Great episodes. The last 2 weeks of Dank Talk went really well. Like, we're finding some good topics, and I've been really going by really quick. So I've had a few people hit me up and tell me they're really enjoying them just for like tips and tricks and, you know, things in the grow, and that's really stoked. That's kind of what I wanted them to be, is just kind of, you know, stuff that anybody can pick up. With these OG sessions, it was more of like kind of geared towards, you know, industry people that have been in the business. You know, I like to think they're pretty much absorbable by anybody, but they're a little more advanced topics. And the Dank Talk, I wanted to be a little more approachable for everybody, home growers, you know, people that aren't necessarily weed lifers or people in the industry. And so with the Dank Talk, my goal was kind of stuff that's a little bit easier for people to pick up and anybody can listen to, and you can just kind of put it on and pick up a little bit of information while you're chilling. So yeah. And tonight, I want to give a little introduction, because my guest tonight, man, is somebody that I met pretty early in my time in Colorado. He's somebody that was around the very early legal scene in Colorado. Was somebody who ran a, you know, legit above ground cannabis extract company early on in cannabis legalization in Colorado, and since then has won, you know, cups, has done tons of things. When I say I know a lot of people in the business, but Josh knows everybody in the business, Josh knows everybody in the business. Like, I know a lot of people in the cannabis world, but Josh absolutely knows everybody. He knows the Colorado scene, dudes, the Spain and Amsterdam, and like, when I say the dude's, you know, international hash guy, not a small thing. What's up, dog?
Yo, what's up, brother? Nice seeing you. Long time no see.
Man, it's good to see you. Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a few years. Glad to see you're still alive and well and kicking it in the cannabis space.
Doing well, man. And to be honest, like, this all kind of came out of like, a desperation, in a sense of like, everybody got sick of Instagram just shooting us down, and the last way that they'll accept anything that's weed related is through video. And so if that's what we have to do, then that's what we'll do. I've always been decent enough at talking shit, so I think it just came naturally.
Let the shit talking commence, my friend. Yeah, for sure.
So, man, one of the things that I think is just kind of a good dart topic for the two of us, and something that I think goes pretty heavily into your expertise and your world, was the explosion of American hash that we saw from 2012 to 2016. And so in that kind of period, we saw essentially the advent and commercialization of live resin, the advent and commercialization of rosin as we today know it, you know.
And the commercialization that back in the day,
yeah.
I mean, 2014 when I was smoking rosin, you never saw more than a gram of it. You know, it was always like the homies that were in the bubble hash scene. They had like a very little bit for head stash, right? And then, you know, fast forward to now, we've got huge machines that process, you know, 20, 30, 40,000 grams of fresh frozen at a time per batch. So I think the evolution of the extracts game, it's gone leaps and bounds from when we first started chopping it up back in 2012, 2013, 2014. And it's really cool to see, because not only has production capabilities increased, but safety has increased as well. And like you said, we saw live resin. Everyone was going from trim to, dry plant.
It was all shatter. 2015,
Shatter.
2014, it was all shatter. Like anything under shatter. If it was waxy, if it was crumble, it was looked at as second tier. Yeah, absolutely.
I would agree. Butter, you know, from like maybe 09, 2010, 2011 was probably the most popular. And then you saw that turnover, you know, in 2012 when nobody wanted opaque, you know, butter or crumbly stuff. It was all just see-through amber glass. And now it's hysterical. You can barely find that stuff on the market, you know, fast forwarding a few years. It's, you know, even fresh press, like that doesn't even last more than a few days. Most of the time, like it ends up being cloudy or buttery, which I prefer
Right.
anyways, you know, but it's definitely pretty crazy to see the evolution. It's funny.
Well, there's kind of a couple of things there, right? So there's the first thing is that it's the first time America has had almost a truly native hash culture. If you talked hash with somebody prior to, you know, 2000, 2010, something like that, hash meant something that came from a field in another part of the country, right? Generally speaking, unless you had a plug in California, generally speaking, most of America's hash at that point was imported. It was stuff that came from overseas, Afghani, Pakistani, all of that, right? The stuff you would have seen in an Amsterdam coffee shop circa 1998, right? Bubble hash
still to this
locally or import, right? That was pretty much it.
I agree.
And then as we saw huge advances, not only in bubble hash, so freeze drying bubble hash, not a thing in 2010. Vac ovens, not really a thing in 2010. Like, you know, there might have been somebody that had one and was putting things together, but the commercialization of using hash ovens or using vac ovens to essentially purge hash, an entirely new technique as we're using it. Like, you know, not that old.
Like I alluded to earlier, it's crazy to see, you know, how these facilities now they have huge budgets and they're very sophisticated, where before it was, you know, all backyard glass tubes, or you were lucky if you had a 5-gallon set of bubble bags to process trim with in your garage or something like that, you know? So yeah, it is kind of crazy to see American hash sort of boom as of right now, and the culture is even it's even appreciated and sought after in other countries. You know, you go over. I've been to Spain and won many awards over there. Been going over there for 5-6 years. I've won Cannabis a few times, and you know, it's just crazy to see how they they put it on a pedestal. You know, like they're like, oh, you're from California. Oh, you have the Cali, you have Cali rosin, you have Cali flavors, and you know, even like the genetics and the types of strains that you know we see in this country are even sought after in other parts of the world. Like they all want that Cali, that Colorado hype, right?
Right. Yeah, and there was a time where it was all. I mean, like the entirety of the world cannabis scene, as far as seeds went, was almost entirely Dutch. It was almost entirely, or transplants that had come from the United States and realized they could produce seeds in Amsterdam. But generally speaking, most of the seeds at a certain point all came from Amsterdam or from Holland, from that area, right? And it's like, that's been the thing that we've seen, at least in genetics in the last 20 years, is that American flavors are hot worldwide, globally. Everywhere you go, they want chems, they want sours, they want OGs, they want that staple stuff that, like,
the desserty stuff.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know, man. If you guys run, I just kind of completely jump trains when you talk about dessert strains. But like the first thing that came to my mind was like the pineapple sorbet, dude. If you guys aren't working with some cut of that, like as far as tropical. Like I've had tons of amazingly complex flavors, but it's one that like it slapped me when I found it, because it was like, you know, it was almost like that first time we all hit Skittles where we're like, oh, boom. It's complex like that. I see now. That's when we started to really see like these hybrids that just are all over the place flavor wise. It's tough to describe with just one or two notes. So like, you know, dessert strains is kind of selling it short, because if you guys are really focusing on, you know, exotic flavors, the reality is right now is the greatest time for genetics in the history of the cannabis plant. Just because there's so many people breeding, there's so many people doing little small home projects, there's so many big scale seed operations now, that it's like the gene pool is exploding at such a rate that the complexity of flavors that we're already seeing now is unparalleled in the history of cannabis. Like if you threw some of these strains out in the middle of the 90s where things were generally piney or they were gassy or they were kind of skunk, yeah, you didn't really have that complex play of just different terps. Now, the other thing that's really helped that, going back to what we were talking about, is the explosion of the hash industry. Terpene retention has never been at a higher point in the history of cannabis and hashish. And so the reality is now we're finally able to see so much of these plants in a true form. When you dry weed, the profile that you're sampling is not the same
100%.
as what that plant had to offer in a live state. So like the process now that we've all, commercializations happen, now it's just how much of that can we retain? How much of those terps can we keep from the moment they come, off the plant to the moment they're in your jar? That's another thing that we didn't have circa 1998, circa 2005, is that level of terps, that appreciation for preserving as much as there is there terpene-wise. I mean, that's exploding in ways that we've never seen. And that's where a lot of that flavor push is coming from, is that you're finally able to sample that plant almost as the day it came off the vine.
It's so appealing when you say it like that. You just crushed it in every, sense of explaining where we're at, with cannabis breeding projects and, breeding for terpene profiles and getting away from the indica sativa hybrid categorization of the plant, right? And we're concentrating more on aromas, tastes, other effects, terpenes. It's cool to see it come into the light now, and even in California stores, currently you see a lot of these bud tenders and general management and even companies like myself going in and trying to educate that, we're now breeding for terpene profiles. That's the differentiating point. That's the only thing you got to take into consideration. And effect, potency, whatever, the plant's always going to produce THC. Whether it's 19% or 35%, I don't even know if you'd really be able to tell me the difference, but you would be able to tell me, hey, this one tasted better. Hey, this one, I felt this from it, and that's really how it should be categorized.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely, man. And that's, like you said, on some level, it's an education thing, because it's educating people more and more that 30% THC isn't necessarily the most amazing thing on the planet. If you just want high THC, find you a good distillate, or find you something that's just high THC. But anybody that's had enough access to enough material for long enough will tell you that's a completely different product than an HTFSE, even just the terp layer. Like when you look at high terpene extracts, and when you look at how much higher just a tiny dab will get you over a big rock of THC, that, like for me, maybe this is just me, but I've always found like high amounts of THC just have a ceiling for me. So I just get a headache. Like it doesn't really get me super over the top high. I just hit a point at a certain point. If I'm just smoking distillate, if I'm just smoking pure crystal, that it kind of gives me a headache, and I'm kind of done at the end of the day. Like it's just not a pleasurable thing. Whereas if you're smoking, what's that?
It's emotionless,
Yeah,
like
very much.
It's just what it is.
There's no nuance. There's no nuance.
Exactly. Like when you're at the level of where we're at, you look for the uniqueness. It's sort of like being a wine sommelier. You want to kind of guess the lineage. You want to guess how it's grown. You want to guess what profile this, is it desserty? Is it hazy? Is it gassy? That's the fun in the game. The fun in the game is not finding the most potent strain on the shelf and being like, let's run that one,
Well, the thing is, like, this is kind of what got us to this point, is that through the 90s and up until kind of what I'm looking at as a little bit more modern breeding era, high THC was what they bred for. And because you weren't going by testing, generally that are trichomes, and it was kind of an ocular thing and a smoke it and tell, right? So like in the push to, I always use Sensi Star as a good throw a dart to where it all went wrong. Because Sensi Star is a beautiful strain in the terp department because it's a high THC strain usually, but it's not the most flavorful, right? And what we see in a lot of those 30 percenters or strains that consistently test higher than 29% is that generally speaking, there's only so much room in a trichome for oil. So if you've got more THC in that trichome, generally speaking, there's less room for terpenes and for flavor content and for other flavor components, right? So that's why you see so many of those strains that test great. It just tastes like weed, bro. It just tastes like weed. At best, it tastes a little hashy. But like, you don't quite get the nuance of a strain that's maybe much higher in terpenes, but just has 20, 18 to 25% THC.
Like that lemon G.
Man, that was a
Oh,
beautiful.
I
That's
went there.
yeah, that's one of those strains, man, that like if you remember it, it touched you.
I remember it.
It touched you in a way because that was another step in the complexity ladder, right? It was once you Lemon G found me at a time where I tasted a lot of things and I tasted citrus before,
Right.
but it had this complex profile that you just wanted to dig in again and again and again. You wanted to hit it one more time so you could try to pick out that Christmas tree wreath, citrus orange peel, funky pine, like all of it, right?
All
And
of it.
so, we're kind of in this point where now that we've bred 30% THC and you can have all the THC you want at this point, we're now having so many other breeders that are going back and saying, maybe THC isn't the most important. What else is out there? And so we're now finding people breeding for these ancillary cannabinoids like THCV and some of these more interesting things. And I honest to God believe that those natural cannabinoids are more efficient in the matrix versus the kind of boom we're seeing now from synthesized CBD, right? So there's so many of the ancillary cannabinoids that are now being produced as kind of a byproduct of the excess CBD problem we had there for a few years.
Right.
Right? Because as soon as hemp went legal, and there were kilos of CBD just being given away like Christmas presents. And
Still
nobody knew
is.
what to do with it. It still is. But now you have this whole subculture of gas station cannabinoids that are literally just derivatives of CBD, that are being made from some derivation of CBD.
It's a problem.
And there's, it's interesting. It's definitely more interesting the JWH synthetic cannabinoid exploratory that the world went on a few years back. And it's like if we're getting into these THC analogs, at least they're natural, like at least they're in the plant. But my point being, when you have all these different ancillary cannabinoids, my belief has always been that they're significantly more efficient, especially on a medicinal level, when taken as either an extract or a whole plant product. So if you
Sure.
can find THCV in a natural strain, that's going to do you a lot more than a THCV cart that you're getting from the gas station. It's
I
essentially some, that's not necessarily an extract pure from a plant. And
No, I would
so
agree.
in that explosion, we're seeing so many breeders that are going back and finding these terpenes, these ancillary smaller terpenes that's what really applies to like when you hit a super complex strain and there's those little things that you're like, I can't quite put my tongue on it, right? That's the small amounts of ancillary cannabinoids that maybe we don't see a ton. We just see a little bit on kind of the bottom of a terp chart, when you see a full terp printout. There's tons of them. There's 20 or 30 that you see kind of regularly. And the difference is now people are going back and that's their favorite flavor, is that strain that has that small amount of, farnesene or has this small amount of like some ancillary terpene that they're super passionate about, and they go breed for that. So now we're getting so many new strains with true cannabinoid profiles that we haven't seen before, true terpene profiles that we haven't seen before. And it's like as much people want to hate on polyhybrids, There's a level of complexity that just wasn't there generations ago, you know, in flavor, in cannabinoid profile, and cannabinoid content. It wasn't around in 74.
I think a lot of you got to give credit to like the analytics side, being able to test, and
That's
these
true.
larger facilities and breeding projects are now able to not hide in their backyard. They're able to just go
That's true.
to the testing facility and be like, hey, this is, these are the inputs, and this is what I'm trying to make. And, I want to test, to see where we're at and to be able to have baselines. It's super huge. We give a large terpene analysis for all of our flavors because we're just, super, firm believers that those other cannabinoids and terpenes, have to be present. That's what makes fireweed fire.
So another way this kind of intersects with a conversation that I've had kind of frequently lately is that most of our modern testing, both cannabinoid and terpene, is generally done for marketing purposes. Unless it's state regulatory, generally the only reason people are testing for terpenes is because they feel like they can advertise with it. So one thing that we haven't seen, and there's been a big debate lately, particularly when it comes to like skunky and gassy strains, about thiols particularly being involved in gassy profiles. And the thing that I've kind of noticed, and a thing that going forward I think we have to kind of maybe discuss in the analytic realm, is what else is in that trichome that isn't on this testing sheet. So what other flavonoids are there? What other flavor components and odor components are there? Like, nobody's doing full broad spectrum analysis of everything that's there. Most analytics companies test for cannabinoids or terpenes. And pesticides and microbials and things like that. But I don't know of any lab, I'm sure it's been done, but I don't know of any lab that's consistently testing for broad spectrum and at least showing a couple of tests of what all is here. Like what else is in that trichome that maybe isn't just terpenes and cannabinoids?
Yeah, I think the limitations that most modern and state-run testing facilities is definitely a hindrance on, the evolution of not only breeding, but, cultivation at a small scale or large scale or whatever. I'm not exactly sure how to fix that problem, I think it's once maybe the federal government gets in and, can come through with their big guns as far as maybe doing something different that these smaller analytical testing facilities, introducing some technology that they don't have access to, or some large universities, maybe that might be another, a key influence on where we go with testing once and if it becomes either, federally legal, or if colleges are ever able to like have an in-house testing or cultivation program, you know what I'm saying? But
Right.
yeah, I think a lot of it's marketing hogwash,
Well, I
like
mean,
you sort of said.
yeah. The other thing is most of the analytics companies that are set up right now in legal states are either set up essentially for, state regulation reasons. So they essentially have to test cannabinoids, so they have to have labs to test it. The
Sure.
reality is there's no money in testing broad spectrum stuff. And so much of that also is that you can't just as an individual send a sample into an analytics lab and say, hey, can you test this for me? I'm just Joe Smo on the street. I don't have a license. I don't have this or that. That's the difference that federal legalization would bring, in that those labs would be able to take samples from anybody, and then there would be a market for that. I would gladly pay whatever it took to be able to test a strain and have a full analysis, even if it's just a casual thing you do occasionally, not at every single strain, but just to finally have some sort of empirical data of everything that's there and not just terpenes and cannabinoids. And then we can really start to have discussions about all of the flavors that are happening. because as it sits right now, terpenes are a small part of it, especially with high terpene extracts where you're grabbing as much of that flavor and as much of that, odor stuff as you can. And it's not all just simply terpenes. And there's so much more there that until we can finally have some sort of analytical testing, then it's tough to really have a debate about what flavor profile is exactly from what. The other thing is cannabis in general is a soup. There's so many different things happening in synergy with other cannabinoids and other terpenes that's why every strain is unique and every strain is its own fingerprint, because that chemical ratio inside that trichome is different for every single strain. Even the same strain grown on two different crops, it can be different. So it's like that chemical signature that each plant has is so unique that really, that's why it's so important that we keep as many of these different flavors going as we can, because that's going to be the billion-dollar idea. The people that can take that absolute fingerprint from every single strain and then be able to put that into any other strain. So like the billion-dollar golden ticket for the gene splicing part is when you have an actual readout of everything that's in this strain, and now I can just take it and stick it into a plant that grows super well, and it'll genetically run identical to, something that just grows perfect in every garden.
That'd be absolutely crazy. That'd be the best.
Yeah, it'd be the best and the worst, but man, I mean, that's, there's so much just in that discussion right there of like how genetics is going to change in a world where everything's absolutely legal. There's no amount of money that can't be spent. There's no amount of money that for research or for, R&D that can't be spent. And, things like that that is happening in some form or fashion in Israel right now. The absolute forefront of cannabis research has always been Israel.
Sure.
That sort of gene work is happening right now. So as strange as what I just said was, that is going to be a reality one day. You can literally tailor a plant genetically to have the exact flavor profile that you want, but instead of being some tiny little scrappy garbage-looking plant that doesn't grow that well, you could throw that flavor in a plant that just 3 alight every single time. Beautiful trikes, like that sort of manipulation is not that far away.
What other industries is that being used on, do you think?
Medicine, health, it's happening a lot in the bites. I mean, all of that sort of stuff when we get into like, gene splicing, protein splicing, protein insertion, and just manipulation on a genetic level. I mean, it's happening, but once again, it's one of those things that like, it's like going to space, right? In the 60s, everybody was about it, and there was tons of money going towards it, and whether you believe we went or not, there was tons of money being spent on our space program. So essentially, that's generally when you see things getting done, and the most progress is when you're just using the most amount of money and the most amount of resources. So once there's the commercial, industrial, or financial way to profit from it, they'll figure it out tomorrow because the groundwork to get there is already there. But it's just because there's not a financial need for it right this minute, 10 years from now, it's fully legal. People are sick of dealing with powdery mildew. They're sick of dealing with mites, sick of dealing with aphids. And Monsanto has a new strain coming out next week that has none of those problems, guaranteed. Or they make the one where you can just piss the pesticides all over it and it doesn't affect the plant. That's the future, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
That's the future.
I don't think that's going to necessarily be the best place in cannabis's, historic lifespan when we do get to that point. I'm more of a grassroots believer and a weed for the
100%.
people type of, type of person, but I definitely understand it's a crazy thing to think about that obviously there's other agricultural products that are, this currently goes through. So obviously, being able to do that with cannabis, it's probably closer than we want to give credit to. And I'm sure, it's that'll the introduction of that will definitely be, I think, a double-edged sword. Absolutely.
Right, and it's one of those that, like, we get back to the, like, Jurassic Park line about you were so busy worrying about whether you could that you never stopped to worry about whether you should. And that's, you know, when we look at tech and just how far things kind of go out of the realm of what we thought was possible, these are discussions that inevitably, you know, at the top people have to start having of, like, you know, what is an industry standard, especially when you look at commercial gardens right now. So many are having problems with, you know, viroids. So many are having problems with these, you know, kind of unique problems that we didn't think would affect flowering cannabis, you know. And once again, it's an analytical level. Like, we now have the ability to test for some of this stuff. So we're starting to see that it's been there the whole time. And most of us that have grown long enough have seen, you know, certain viroids or problems that we saw that we couldn't explain, that we went, well, there's got to be something here, because it's not a deficiency and it's not a toxicity, and, you know, everything else around it's perfectly healthy, and there's testable methods. And so we start to see that now that we have all these analytic possibilities, we're seeing things that have been here the whole time. This is popping up on me. Okay. And so there's so much of it that just having the analytics and knowing what to look for has helped us a great deal. But the thing going forward that we have to continue to do is to keep genetics that mean something to you. Keep genetics. We have to hoard seeds, to share seeds. Because the more of this that we can get out into other people's hands, the more, once that point hits, we have enough material that is, you know, there's other things that you can use. You don't necessarily have to be in a situation where you have to run Monsanto soybean or Monsanto cannabis because you've now gotten in a commercial licensing deal and you can't get out of, you know, like, these are the realities of the future that nobody's really discussing on a large scale, but that inevitably are going to become problems, especially in commercial gardens where everything's profit driven, everything is entirely determined. You know, when I moved to Colorado in 2013, 14, every grow I went in had Eagle 20 on their shelf. I never went in a grow. I don't know that I went in a single commercial grow that didn't have Eagle 20 on their shelf. Because because it was before testing. Testing didn't happen in Colorado until 2016. So right. Like, every grow I went into had Avid, everyone, because that was the industry standard. And because on a commercial level, that's what people accepted we just had to use. You know, most of these big grows had PM that was resistant to Eagle 20. I don't know how many grows I went into where they were using Eagle and they still had powdery mildew. So it's like,
for sure.
Persistent problems commercially that we see over and over and over. That's going to be the moment of weakness where somebody goes, oh, wait, you have a strain that won't get powdery mildew? Yeah, I don't care what that tastes like. We'll grow that. We'll grow fields of that just because we can put it all in pre-rolls and nobody's going to see it. Nobody's going to care.
Run it just for cannabinoids and distillate production.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
That's what those autoflower fields in Oklahoma are for.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That might be the funniest thing anybody's ever said to me, is a commercial autoflower grow. And that's something I never thought I'd really hear much of, because that whole industry is kind of just in the last handful of years has started to come into something that people want to smoke, because for years and years and years,
it's even for infusing. People don't even want to smoke it. They'll just infuse it.
Yeah, it was just jank. But now there's starting to, you know, there's people breeding autos and there's a lot more breeding happening. And so you're starting to see more and more like flavor profiles in autoflower strains and stuff like that, which is, it's crazy, man. Yeah. We threw autos away for 20 years. If it autoflowered, it went in the garbage.
I would agree. No, for sure. Now you got fields of it, thousands and thousands of acres being blown out in Oklahoma, specifically going for just the oil. It's all going to distillate production. It's all going to vape pens or infusions. They're probably going out of state, you know, probably. I'd imagine that's what you'll do with 10,000 acres of autoflower, you know.
Right. I mean, there was a time where, like, Northern California supplied a sizable chunk of the weed smoked in the United States. And now that large percentage of that has moved to commercial grows, moving shit out the back door, diversion, whether it's from the, whether it's product that's picked up from the counter or that's walked out the back door, it ends up in other parts of the countries now. And that's largely, a huge bulk of what people are smoking across the country is just either C and D grade weed from dispensaries. I mean, you just don't see, I'm sure it's a thing, especially for you in California. Still, there's tons of outdoor work, but the reality is dispensaries now are fueling a ton of that now. Yeah.
Right.
So tell me about dessert strains.
Dessert strains. So me and an acquaintance from Colorado, actually, my friend, he used to run an operation out in Colorado called Pink House. He used to,
I remember Pink House.
Yeah, he used to be like an operations, guy, help out in the grow, obviously the dispensaries, managing, and he's an OG. But basically, him and myself started dessert strains after, we had to pivot a few months ago from a gig that we had in Long Beach, building out an extraction facility in a distro spot, and then it never ended up coming to fruition. So last minute we pivoted and we launched a week before 420 out here, and we're just trying to bring herb that people would smoke every day at a very good price point, affordable, because that's what we want people to have access to, good affordable cannabis that they could smoke every day and be stoked that they bought it. We want to have products that bud tenders and the people flipping our stuff are like, yo, this is a good deal, like it's super quality, like that's what we're going for. We're not trying to.
Are you guys producing? Like, you have a grow?
No, we're just working with a couple outdoor, and we don't have an outdoor line currently. We have Mixed Light and Greenhouse currently, but we have a few really nice partners up in Humboldt, a good co-op or two that treat everyone in the co-op super well. Everyone gets paid. It's super quality herb. You can tell that they really take care of not only their facility, but they take care of the product through the curing process as well, basically. So our packs are usually curated towards the more desserty, exotic-y type of vibe. Whether it be gelatos or cakes or cookies or pies, but you sort of mentioned earlier, like your sorbets, your ice creams, anything fun and desserty, Skittles crosses, things like that basically are what we're trying to just deliver to the people. That's what I like smoking. That's what is really selling in California right now. And as you know from my prior experiences and my homie Bryce, who runs dessert strains with me, prior experiences, we have access to, a lot of really good flavors that are sort of ahead. We're able to sort of pick and choose, maybe even ahead, like Skittles we were smoking in 2013, 2014. We were always ahead of the game with the sours and the lemon G13s and all of these other super unique things that not a lot of people had. So that's sort of our vibe. We're utilizing our past relationships and our ability to sort of pick out good flavors that are going to hit, and then we are able to just give them to everybody. That's sort of what we're doing.
So, man, one of the greatest tragedies that will be told in the history of cannabis was the state that absolutely started the push for legalization, the push for medical marijuana, just California, and how badly they absolutely botched legalization. I mean, the difference between the way that their medical program worked and worked for the patients and the way that they made, they didn't do what a lot of states did, which was just blanket take the Colorado method and kind of tweak it a little bit here and tweak it a little bit there. They just kind of said, we don't really care. We're just kind of pretend like it's not really there. And there's so many areas like, it's not like Colorado, where in Colorado, it's part of the identity of the state that weed is legal there. And I know that kind of sounds kind of strange, but the embrace in Colorado of people who aren't even in or around the industry of just, we're cool with weed. It's a thing. We're known for it. We're cool with that. Whereas in California, that hasn't been the approach. That hasn't been you see so many areas where they're just like, no, they're just like, absolutely
A
not.
lot of places are no.
Just crazy for a state that's as big as California and that should absolutely be just raking in money from legal weed because there's so much tourist money there.
It's the most
That
visited
industry,
state.
it should have been so simple. You had a perfect medical program and then you just shit the bed.
RIP Prop 215, if you're listening.
We could do an hour on just that, on how badly the implementation was,
for sure.
on how badly just something that should have just been everybody just counting stacks of money. Everybody, the state, the federal government, every grow, and it's just the implementation has just been so sad. I mean, even when you look at states like Seattle, Washington, like Washington's the situation is definitely not perfect, but I don't think they botched rolling it out as badly as California has. And whether it's taxes that are too high, they're not being unified, kind of get back to the federal legalization thing, they're not being a unified, codified set of rules for everybody. So there's certain places that just say, well, this is cool and this isn't. This size grows cool here, but this size dispensaries maybe not. Or you can't have hash labs here. Or, and it's like now that we're dealing with labs that have C1, D1, everything's,
federally compliant.
Absolutely as safe as it can be. It's like there shouldn't still be this almost the black market shouldn't be thriving as much as it is. But the other side is if people had cheap, safe places to get legit weed, you wouldn't really have this problem. And, it's a lot of it's greed from the state and the cities because they all want to tack on so much tax that it's almost impossible to efficiently grow dank weed.
That's where Cali fucked up the most, in my opinion, is just that 30+% tax. The state is like a 30% business partner off your gross revenue, not even net. So it's an extra, I think 30 to 33, 34, 35, maybe even 36% on top of, your subtotal basically.
That's a partner. That's a partner.
That's what I'm saying. They take more gross participation than most places even have to chop up for their ownership. It's absolutely disgusting, and that's why the black market thrives. And a lot of these larger operations, like so many people out here backdooring stuff just to make ends meet because there's just not enough authoritarian figures to regulate. A, the state's too big. B, and these grows, some of them are huge properties. You've got a 30-acre plot, with 30,000, actual square foot of canopy separated into parcels, and each parcel has its own gate and lock, and you're not getting through it. So the state has a hard enough time keeping up with the retail stores that have a flagship reachable spot because you have to be ADA accessible, and most people want foot traffic, so they're going to have a storefront relatively close to main roads and stuff, unlike these grows and these distros that are so far off the beaten path that they'll never be touched. And that's true Cali black market vibes right there, right? You don't want people to be able to access your property. You don't want people to know what's going on. So
the thing
unfortunately
is a lot of that is just your buy-in. A lot of that is just that the threshold to get to that point is so high and such a headache. Whereas I don't know the ins and outs, but I've been told kind of Maine particularly has some sort of situation where as a smaller grower, medium-sized grower, or even as a larger grower, there's ways that you can get to market that aren't
pulling teeth and, you know, ridiculous. So like if you're just a small grower and you got 10 lights at your, you know, situation, there's a way for you to get to market legally. The fact that it's literally all just geared towards huge corporations and large money is really the problem. And it's a lot of it is because of federal legalization. A lot of it is because of the federal banking problem. A lot of it is because you can't really bank your $100 million of weed money, right? So
Not at Chase Manhattan, you
say
can't.
that's a hypothetical number, right? So what you have to do is you have to start another grow. And now you have to start a dispensary. And now you have to start a hash lab. And whereas you were doing pretty well, now you've created all this artificial inflation. This is particularly bad in the Colorado market, you know,
Right.
where essentially so many of these companies aren't built to last. They're not built to really, we're going to be a sustainable cannabis company. It's just how much can we inflate ourselves so that when we drag the next set of suckers in here to invest, it looks good
It
enough
looks
that they'll
good.
buy it.
Right.
It looks good enough.
It's part of the portfolio. I would agree. You know, being a micro business or a small business, even or that caregiver model is just not a super popular thing anymore. You know, unfortunately, shout out the home growers. Like I think someone said earlier, it's that are overgrowing the government still and doing it specifically for the plant. They're not profit driven or anything like that. So shout out the individuals who are crushing home grows still.
Well, that's why having home grows in your legalization process is absolutely essential. I mean, even if that's like, in Colorado, that went from when I moved there, you could still have 99 plants. You could still get a 99 plant count from a doctor. And then, around 2016, when they changed the pesticide laws, they also changed the caregiver rules. And now you could have like 36 plants in one place or something, which to be fair, if you're a decent grower and you grow big plants, 36 plants can be a lot of weed. But like it definitely put kind of a line in the sand of like, and that's what a lot of them want. They want to put a line in the sand between you're either legal or you're not, and if you're legal, pay your taxes. That's it. That's
Not
the
legal.
only, yeah.
Tax.
If you're not legal, pay your taxes too.
Tax.
You're not legal. If you're not legal, pay your taxes too. Joe Biden coming for that tax money. But yeah, I mean, the reality is that's the only, in every one of these states that legalizes, the first priority, number one, in the paperwork for the laws of how it's all done is how do we get our tax money? That's the only thing that some of these states ever really worry about. And that's part of the problem is that they're not really making the kind of changes as they go, as they see that like what we've done, not really working all that well.
No
so we need
industry
to make
is
some
taxed
tweaks.
as much as cannabis. Oil and petroleum products, refineries, casinos,
Beer?
nothing is taxed.
No.
Alcohol, another good one. Tobacco, also a good one. Nothing is taxed on the gross level the way cannabis, they decided to just be like, 35% partner, pay up,
Yep.
It's just absolute insanity. And it's just, there's a lot of, there's a lot of improvement that I think that could come specifically to California if the politicians decided to actually listen as opposed to regulate from afar and point the finger and say, when I say jump through this hoop, you have to ask me, how high, basically. It's
not to get political, but I think a lot of that just has to do with the nature of how politics in a state that's as big as California work, in that we all kind of think of California as this one thing, and it's almost not that at all. Like it's definitely governed in different areas, different ways, and there's parts that are extremely conservative, and there's parts that are extremely liberal, and when they have to do anything around each other or near each other, it's like magnets on the wrong poles at this point. It's just anything having to do with anything rational, logical in government has kind of gone out the window at this point. And it's like, if I see you say you want it, it is now my goal to say I don't want that with everything I have. And that's just the nature of, you know, small town politics versus big city politics in a state that's, you know, almost, if not the biggest state in the country, either by gross, you know, gross land or number of people. It's one of the biggest and most influential, but in its smaller core, there's so many different, you know, right now you're seeing a mass exodus of people kind of leaving California for kind of the same reasons, is that nobody
100%.
can get along there. And if you're not in the right area, it's very polarizing. And, you know, there's just a lot of, when you get into the finer aspects of cannabis law and how things get changed city to city and, you know, different things like that and what needs to be fixed, even agreeing that what we're doing right now isn't working and that something needs to be fixed.
To be
That
huge.
alone can be a huge, you know, just to get 5 people to agree there's a problem is a tough thing. But when you've got huge bodies of people that have to all agree, that, you know, that you really get into it. And that's the difference in that Colorado moved very unilaterally. It's a long night. It's my second podcast. Unilaterally. When they laid out their laws, they essentially came out and said, we're changing this, we're changing this, we're changing this, and that's it. So, like, then they had pesticide laws. Didn't have it 2014. Now they had, you know, plant count laws. Didn't have that before. And when you look at generally just how the two states' markets work, like, Colorado's is at least set up to be a business, and it's very business. And they figured out how to make money without taxing every nickel out of people. Not to say it's the super profitable business that most people think it is, because that's one of the biggest myths in cannabis, is that everybody's just making it rain with money.
Colorado's just too saturated for the amount of people that it has.
Yeah.
You know, I think on a macro level, you have to figure out how many people you're going to have as consumers, and then you have to, you know, figure out how many people you're going to allow and how much cannabis to actually grow. You know, Oregon's super overgrown because everyone has huge grows, you know, and they can't flip it. Colorado, you know, absolutely at a huge surplus. California, absolute surplus. You know, they just the open markets at these states, you know, allow sometimes aren't. They're like their own worst nightmare, right? Anyone can just get in and blow it out, and you don't even have to have a market for it yet, right? You just grow.
Well, dude, the honestly thing about Colorado, in 2014, there was maybe 1, 2 outdoor commercial grows. And then at one point, a bunch of grows came online down in Pueblo. To be fair, they changed. That was another thing that changed in Colorado, was that in 2014, you had to produce all the weed you sold, or at least a massive percentage of what you sold at the counter.
Like 70 or 80%
right.
or something like that.
And then that changed and opened up for like wholesale outlets and places that didn't even have a dispensary, because before you had to have both, like a dispensary and a grow.
Yep.
You had to grow your own weed. And so that changed. That changed so much, because then you started to have huge grows come on, just flood the market with, you know, really nasty wholesale weed that nobody wants to smoke. And anyway, man, we're hitting our line here, so I'm just going to call it. This is 2 hours in a row we just did. So I appreciate you coming on, Josh. It was so good to see you. I knew having you on it'd be an easy hour, no problem, because every time we ever chatted, it was easy times. And you really are somebody that's, I don't say this a lot, but man, you really do know everybody in the weed business. You've been around every person for ages now, and you know, man, it was really awesome to get to chat with you this evening. Where can people find you other than Dessert Strains?
Yeah, so Instagram is at dessert_strains, STRANZ. You know, no I, a little more playful. And then our website's www.enjoydessertstrains, all, you know, obviously one word, .com. And yeah, give us a follow. We really appreciate the Instagram, you know, hype. We're a pretty new company, so every like to us is super important. Thank you.
Do you want to do some more of these? Like, not just you and I, but like there's a handful of other people that we kind of do podcasts with. And, you know, if you're looking to do other ones, I can put you in touch with a couple of the other people that we do podcasts with, that I've done podcasts with, and, you know, help you guys get your brand out there and more eyes on you.
Yeah, man, we'd appreciate it for sure. I mean, all the exposure at this point is good exposure for us. You know,
For sure.
we're super fresh. So,
For sure.
you know, I'm an OG, but the brand that,
Yeah.
you know, that I'm rocking right now is super new. So, yeah, we appreciate it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, man. I know at least one or two other ones that I do kind of regularly and that kind of got me into doing my own. It'd be great exposure for you. As always, for me, if you're looking for seeds, www.terpene.com, TERPFI3ND.com. All of the rest of my social media at TERPFI3ND. Go follow me somewhere other than Instagram, please, because Reddit is where we're posting weed pics. These all go up on my YouTube. We're trying to get away from using Instagram. It's just the biggest user base out there, and they really don't want us here. They just don't really want us on Instagram. So, like, the reality is, go follow me somewhere other than Instagram. Discord, our Discord community is really popping. Josh, thank you so much again, buddy. We'll have you on again because we could do another hour just on, like I said, how badly California botched their legalization.
Dude.
You know, it'd be easy.
Dude, I'm into that. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, Josh. Have a good one, buddy. Take it easy.